Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
It's been a couple weeks since we've recorded live, and we literally just missed Microsoft Secure. So we had recorded on that Sunday, and then Microsoft Secure happened that week, and there was a lot of big news. We're not going to talk about it all, but I did want to highlight that Microsoft introduced something called Security Copilot. And we literally had just talked about it a few weeks back about the M365 Copilot, which is the large language model powered feature that you can ask normal human-based questions and ask it to do things within the M365 suite. Now, the Security Copilot will integrate kind of the same thing. It's powered by OpenAI's GPT-4 generative AI, large language model base, and it will integrate with all of the security products, and you'll be able to ask natural languages with a prompt, very similar to the M365 Copilot, but it's focused on security. So something like, what are my most critical incidents right now? Or summarize this vulnerability like Log4j for me. Or show me who's received this email in the last 24 hours. You can also drop in files for it to analyze, like log files or even files that you may be suspicious of. And similar to the M365 Copilot, like we talked about, there is data privacy built in that was very, very laid out, that your data is secure within your own tenant, as well as the prompts and everything will not be used to train the underlying model. So a lot of privacy built in, just like the rest of our products. And they also highlighted some things like inaccuracies, because at some points the AI may be inaccurate. And I think that's something that a lot of people are discovering, is that these large language models have some inaccuracy, especially when it comes to things that they haven't seen before, because they're able to collect all the underlying information that we have currently. But if you're trying to predict something that you haven't seen before, there may be some inaccuracies. And then you can correct the AI, you can correct the response that comes in, and that'll help train your model within your tenant. It is currently in private preview. I think it is pretty hard to get into this private preview. It's fairly closed now. I heard that there were like maybe 10 Fortune 500 companies, maybe like total like 20 or 30 companies that are testing it. But if it is something of interest, you could always reach out to your Microsoft team and see if there's a possibility of getting into that private preview. And then I think the communication says that sometime this year it's expected to go public preview. That could be more towards the end of the year.
This was really an exciting demo. It was a demo that kind of knocked my socks off me, because when you think of large language models, really a lot of the things they're good at are really helpful here for security defenders. And anyone listening to the show, if you watch the demo, I think the first thing you immediately understand is this does not put your job at risk. This helps augment your human ingenuity, but we still need people to actually take the actions, do hands-on keyboard, that sort of thing. One of the interesting things about all these large language models is almost universally, they can't take action. They can kind of give you suggestions. They can tell you things to do, but they don't actually hook into the systems. And I think that's by design. And I think that's a really good design. So we're not to the point where you're going to be able to say, hey, automate this incident and go resolve it for me automatically. Like, we already have some automated incident investigation and response capabilities in Microsoft 365 Defender. And that's more, kind of not on the same realm as this. It's a different thing, but it's still there to help do some of the more menial tasks as far as a common incident might be concerned. So this is really going to help you. I don't think you have to be concerned about risks of this affecting your job. Talking about the data privacy components for a second. And this is something that's really near and dear to anyone who's been at Microsoft now for any period of time. We have this internal training we do annually, and it's called the Standards of Business Conduct. And it's shot like a Netflix series. It's actually really awesome. It's one of the best internal trainings like I've ever had to do. It's really funny culturally at Microsoft. People get excited for like the next season of SBC. And it's like, don't give me spoilers. And I don't want to know what happens to Nelson or some of the other characters. It's really fun. Well, this is not a spoiler. I think at this point, since we're like 6 or 7 seasons in the first season, Nelson uses customer data to train a model and almost gets fired from Microsoft for doing that. And he goes through a lot of these repercussions for not respecting customer privacy. And we talk about throughout the entire series, and every person at Microsoft takes this training, all 200,000 plus employees, that Microsoft runs on trust, and that customer data is not used to train models without customer consent, like ever, ever, ever. So that's something that's been rooted like in my mind and in anybody who's been around for a while for literally 6-7 years. So when we're building things like this, one of the commitments we make very loudly and openly is that this doesn't change any of our data privacy, data security, data handling commitments we make to customers. And so when we tell customers, your data is your data is never used to train underlying models, we mean it very, very sincerely. And that's something that's been baked in for many years now, prior to OpenAI even being a glimmer in anyone's eye. So certainly understand the concern, understand desire to do your due diligence, and as well you should. However, just understand that the underlying model that's trained and leverages, GPT-4 technology, in this case is specific. It's a specific model for information security type use cases. And it's been trained on corpus of public data that's accessible, but again, never customer data, never without anyone's consent. And so as you do, like Andy talked about, your queries or your questions or your prompts, I guess is the language we use to refer to them, as well as the unique data to your environment, like your incidents and alerts, none of that filters back down. So you can be really, really, really confident in that. Andy mentioned, private preview, public preview. One thing I'll add to that, if you want to increase your chances of getting selected for a preview in the future, the more Microsoft security tools you're using, the better chance you have to get in. My understanding is all the customers in the current private preview today, they're deployed literally across the stack. Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Cloud Apps, and Microsoft Sentinel. So if you're interested in this, you're going to get the most value out of it if you're well deployed on the Microsoft stack. Now, they talked about during the presentation the importance of having connectors with third parties, and that there's the Microsoft Intelligence Security Association, or MISA, and that's this partner group that brings connections into Microsoft tooling, and spoke to the importance of information security as a team sport. So I think you'll hear more in the future of Copilot, Security Copilot extending itself to third parties. But for the initial release, for that minimum viable product, it's going to be mostly built around the existing, what I'd call the M365 Defender solutions. And so the more of those you have deployed, A, the better experience you're going to get when this becomes publicly available, but B, the better chance you have of getting selected for like a preview release of it as well. And then finally, Copilot, you're going to hear that brand a lot from Microsoft because that's kind of our all-up AI-powered brand across different solutions. When the very first announcement of kind of this wave, Bing Chat was released, Bing Chat was described as your Copilot for the web. And then you had GitHub Copilot, and you have M365 Copilot, and you have Dynamics 365 Copilot, and now you have Security Copilot. So Copilot is an all-encompassing brand for you to think like an AI assistant that helps augment your human capability And that's across multiple Microsoft solutions. So you do have to be more specific and specifically say like Security Copilot, M365 Copilot, for somebody to know what you're talking about.
The other bit of news that happened was just recently, a few weeks ago, the Microsoft Incident Response Retainer went generally available as well. And this, to me, honestly, was news because I didn't even know that we had an Incident Response Retainer like in the works. And some people may not know what an Incident Response Retainer is. So it's essentially, there are many vendors out there. Like Microsoft is one. Rapid7 is a big player in this space. Mandiant is a huge player in this space. Cisco. Many of the security vendors have a incident response retainer or something that you can pay for essentially to have ready to go. And usually it's a prepaid block of time or however the vendor wants to charge for that. But the agreement is essentially if your company suffers a cybersecurity attack, this company will come in and help you investigate, remediate, stop the attack. Really, really, I think important to have something like this because generally the amount of money that you pay is not a huge amount. I don't have numbers for you, but to me, I think having a retainer, because these guys go in and do incident response all the time. That's what they do. That's their job. They've seen it. They know where to look. They know how to stop the things. So just having them come in and provide even expertise during an incident response and help maybe even calm you, because you're probably going to be hyped up if this is something that's really impacting you, right? Stressful. And so I think it's a good thing to have on hand, whether you go with Microsoft or you go with someone else. But in the blog that we'll have in the show notes, Microsoft provides a couple of different things like a security delivery manager, which helps you take advantage of the service throughout the year, because it's not just like during an attack, but there's like proactive services throughout the year, as well as threat intelligence briefings and so on and so forth. So evaluate whether or not this is something for you. Take a look at other vendors and see what they offer. But I do urge that if you don't have a retainer on hand, to take a look and get one, because it's nice just to have that peace of mind that, yes, we're trying to do everything possible. We think we have everything shored up. If something happens, okay, great. I have someone, the red phone is ready. The bat phone is ready to call my guy at, Microsoft or Rapid7 or Mandiant or whoever to come in and do that investigation. So the incident response retainer, unlike some of the other things that we were talking about earlier, it is available to new and existing Microsoft customers. You don't have to be using Microsoft security products. It's a vendor agnostic service, which is great. And it's available for enterprises, government, education, nonprofit customers on the Microsoft Commercial Cloud. So it looks like Gov Cloud is not involved. It specifically states Commercial Cloud. So that is a big chunk of our customers, though.
I've had the pleasure of speaking to various members of our, what I think it used to be called the DART team. I believe that changed, but it was DART, that did these responses. So Microsoft has done this for a long time. This is not Microsoft announcing we've spun up a new team. I think this is a way of broadening access to that team and maybe more formalizing that engagement. In the past, what we used to kind of tell customers is the closest thing you could do to a retainer for our DART team, our incident response team, was to have, at the time called a Premier Support Agreement. Now it's called a Unified Support Agreement. But I think this more formalizes that and really ensures that there's the availability when you're going to need it. So this is maybe something that either replaces or augments that. You talk to your Microsoft Services rep for more details. But this is just kind of putting it more formalized. And again, like Andy said, this team is awesome. They've been there. They've done that. They've seen everything. Every customer I've ever talked to that has had the unfortunate, pleasure of working with that team says they're absolutely top notch. They're the best of the best. And this just gives you a new way to make sure that's really buttoned up and you're ready to go if and or when you need them. And again, they are they will work with you regardless of who you use from a technology provider perspective. But even if you don't use any Microsoft security tools, I'd be willing to bet you still run a lot of Microsoft operating systems between your servers and clients and your internal identity. So still a lot of value in having Microsoft there to help shore things up at the end of the day. So just something new to check out and chat with your Microsoft account team about and make you aware of. But certainly our listeners, I think something that's valuable for them to know that it exists. And it's something you can get lined up now before you need it.
And finally, another bit of Microsoft news. My intention wasn't to have this whole thing be about Microsoft, but it just happened. So
it just happens sometimes.
We have a lot of news sometimes. So we were making some waves in the media when we released a blog article from the Exchange team talking about how the Microsoft Exchange team is going to turn on this new security feature, which will start automatically throttling and then eventually blocking all emails sent from, quote, persistently vulnerable Exchange servers 90 days after the admins are pinged to secure them. So a little bit of clarity on it. It does include any Exchange server that has reached end of life, which includes Exchange 2007, 2010, and then soon 2013, and any that remain unpatched for known vulnerabilities, which will include any current ones like Exchange 2016, 2019. So if your servers are unpatched and there are critical vulnerabilities, this will affect it as well. Initially, this will only start with a very small subset of Exchange 2007 servers. So only 2007. And probably taking a look at how that affects these customers. Microsoft has already reached out and pinged all of them, and everyone who is running Exchange on-prem should have a notification within their message center, which, by the way, if you're a Microsoft admin and you're not checking, you're doing yourself a disservice. That message center has a lot of really good information, not only just communication from Microsoft about different features that are going live, different notifications like service outages, as well as threat intelligence. Like if you're looking at the security reports, there's things about threat intelligence and other reports that are coming through that it's really good information. So I highly recommend that you check your message center, make it part of your daily, routine to get in there and check that. But once the admins have been pinged about it, they'll have 30 days to remediate with nothing in between from 0 to 30 days. Nothing will happen. It's just the first warning. After 30 days, email will start to get throttled and it'll kind of slowly ramp up every 10 days until it reaches 60 days. And at that point, some blocking will occur and it'll continue to ramp up more and more blocking until 100% blocking at 90 days. So if nothing happens after the first initial notification, after 90 days, all email from that on-prem Exchange server will be blocked into Exchange Online. So that's the whole of it. There's a lot of argument, I think, among some of the media, among some of the podcasts that I've listened to about how this is forcing customers to buy new licenses and it's kind of a money grab from Microsoft. I don't look at it like that. I think Exchange on-prem servers that are unpatched or end of life do have a significant threat footprint and are vulnerable to attack. Not only, the companies themselves, but that can sprawl into like supply chain attacks as well. So many companies can be affected depending on who's running these servers. So I don't think it's a money grab. I think it's just really a way of kind of heavy-handedly saying, whether that's right or wrong, but really forcing these customers to upgrade to current software so that they can get security patches.
So being in our field sales organization, one thing we have our fingers pretty well on the pulse of is what's important for Microsoft to kind of sell. Where are we trying to focus our energy? on-premises software, to put it mildly, is not an emphasis at all. As far as I know, there's almost no one at Microsoft who really is like trying to do this to make a cash grab. There aren't people who are measured or compensated that way. It's just not. So the way I see it, the Microsoft 365 service has always had minimum requirements to connect to and to work with it. On the client side, there's minimum versions of Internet Explorer that you used to have. Now it's Edge. There are minimum versions of the Outlook client or the Office clients or the OneDrive client to connect. And that's because those unpatched versions had known vulnerabilities, and you don't want vulnerable stuff connecting to your environment. I mean, that's the crux of this. Is it's not like remote Exchange servers, like on-premises Exchange servers, are just getting like blown up and like can't send email, period. It's Exchange Online, Microsoft's cloud email service, will not accept messages from known vulnerable on-premises servers and won't relay email through them. That is all it is. If you don't use Exchange Online, if you're not in any sort of hybrid mode, if you're solely on premises and you don't want to patch your Exchange servers, nobody's stopping you. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's a really bad idea, but this is, Microsoft as a cloud service that operates. And again, if you start spewing like spam out to the global internet, you start getting put on like spam block lists, and then email doesn't get delivered. That's really bad for a lot of Microsoft's customers. They can't have that. Like for Microsoft to be a reputation of spammy email coming from Exchange Online service. So ultimately, it's just based on my knowledge of how Microsoft functions, I don't see this as a cash grab. I see this as a genuine, like, these are extremely insecure servers that are out of support and unpatched, or they are in support, but they're unpatched for known vulnerabilities. And there are just a lot of risks that come with that. And Microsoft is always, on the client side and other sides, set minimum standards for system requirements before you're allowed to connect and interact with the service. So I just don't see this as a whole lot different. I've been honestly shocked at some of the takes on podcasts, like you said, Andy, like Windows Weekly, Security Now, both on Leo Laporte's Twit network, have both kind of come out pretty strongly. And I think the conversation is more nuanced than that. And the other thing is, this is all like very slow ramp. Andy walked you through it. This is starting with Exchange 2007 servers, which are just grossly out of support and grossly vulnerable. And it's going to ramp up slowly from there. And Microsoft has always had a pretty good history of learning from customer feedback. And if this absolutely blows up in our face and really is not going well, then we may adjust course. That has happened before. However, I see this as kind of unlikely, because it's in any other sense of the word, like, this isn't something you would allow. Like, if you're a security professional, are you allowing multi-behind versions of iOS to like connect to your mobile device management? Are you allowing like out of support Windows client versions to connect to your services? Like, that's not something you do, right? You ensure that everyone's on a patched and supported version to continue to operate in your world. So I don't get this, especially coming from security professionals. It's odd. So that's my take on it. I mean, again, read the blog post for yourself, because understand, A, this is going to be a longer rollout unless you're on Exchange 2007, in which case you may get impacted sooner than later. And B, understand this is only for the privilege of relaying through Exchange Online and not for any other use case. So, you could configure your architecture if you have to keep these very old unpatched versions around for some reason. Don't use that one to relay to Exchange Online. Build some sort of Exchange infrastructure. And I apologize, I'm ignorant as to how all this works, but designate the relay server to be one that's actually patched and up to date, and have them hand off internally or something. I'm sure you can do that. So again, it's one of those, I get, like, email is one of the ultimate, like, don't touch my cheese services of anything, but email is both a double-edged sword in that sense, that it's highly critical, so we don't want to touch it, but it's highly critical, so it's important we keep it running smoothly.
Yeah, I think you made two really good points there, and I just wanted to highlight just one more time. It is a small set, and in my experience, and I'm pretty sure it's also in your experience, there are very, very few customers that I've talked to nowadays that still have an on-premise server, and if they do, it's usually configured in a hybrid configuration. And for the most part, the teams that I talk to know that on-premise Exchange is very vulnerable to attacks, and so they do keep it up to date as much as possible. So I don't know of any customers running end of life on-premise Exchange servers, and I'm sure the Exchange team probably has telemetry or some sort of data to show that, but I can't imagine that there are many large enterprises for sure that are running significant amount of out-of-date Exchange servers. And then the other thing, without revealing how the sausage is made, but yeah, like you said, we are in sales, and if we sell you a couple licenses of on-premise Exchange, we don't really, as our compensation model, we don't really make anything off of that. I'm not going to break my back to sell you new, 2022 Exchange on-premise, server licenses. I don't care about that. No, I don't think anybody in the sales org really cares about that at all, based on our compensation. So, really good points there. Anything else to add?
It's good to be back. There's always stuff going on in this world, and some exciting stuff happening with Security Copilot, and I'll be interested to see how some of the competition reacts. I think that's one of the fun parts about this business is how quick it moves, and it feels like we're only moving faster and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Very exciting times. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for listening and watching as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or future topics you want us to talk about. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.